Here's 1999, and the Philadelphia Eagles are at an inflection point in their long, storied history. Owner Jeffrey Lurie and the top-level leadership of the team knows that they need to make a change and take the franchise in a new direction after a relatively lackluster run over the past few years. From 1995 to 1998, the Eagles went 29-34-1, and that includes an abysmal 3-13 record in 1998. Much maligned head coach Ray Rhodes had just been let go, and the team replaced him with a quarterback coach from Green Bay named Andy Reid. With the second overall pick in the draft, the Eagles have a once-in-a-decade opportunity to get a true difference maker to reinvigorate their franchise and reignite a passionate fan base in Philadelphia. It's absolutely critical that they hit on this selection. So, who did they pick?
With the second pick, the Philadelphia Eagles select Donovan McNabb, quarterback, Syracuse University.
As we all know now, with the second overall pick in the 1999 draft, the Philadelphia Eagles would select Syracuse quarterback Donovan McNabb. And boy, were Philadelphia fans upset by this selection. They wanted Texas running back Ricky Williams. And in fact, hardcore fans who were driven down to the draft by Philadelphia radio station WIP booed Donovan as he was being selected. In hindsight, though, these fans probably should not have been upset. They had no way of knowing at the time, but over the course of his career with the Eagles, McNabb will become one of the most successful quarterbacks in franchise history. Over the course of his career, he ended up leading the team to 5 NFC title game appearances, including 4 straight from 2001 to 2004, which culminated in a Super Bowl berth. McNabb would quarterback the team for 11 years, and he set multiple franchise records in almost every major passing category. Donovan McNabb is considered by many fans and analysts to be the best quarterback the Eagles have ever had. Yet, at the same time, if he so much as utter his name in Philadelphia, the city will almost certainly erupt into a violent civil war. In fact, I imagine this video is going to cause something like this too. Donovan is that controversial. Many fans consider Donovan to be a failure, who withered when the light shone brightest, and who never really held himself accountable, both physically and mentally. Rumors still persist to this day that teammates hated him in the locker room, that he was lazy and indifferent at best, and self-centered at worst. So, who is he? Which quarterback is Donovan McNabb? Was he the guy who led the Eagles to one of the most sustained runs of success in franchise and NFL history? A winner and a franchise great? Or was he a choker? A guy with health issues that would ultimately derail his career? A bad teammate? Well, if I'm being honest, the answer is that he was both. But ultimately, the good may not be enough to negate the bad, at least in the hearts and the minds of fans. But let's give the guy a fair shake. Let's break down his career, let's break down the good and the bad, and really understand just what makes Donovan McNabb Philadelphia's polarizing player. So, to start things off here, let's go over the good things about Donovan McNabb and his career. Great! Now with that covered, let's get right into the bad things. Jokes aside, as you might be able to tell by that bit, I'm not exactly stumping for Donovan McNabb to be in the Hall of Fame here. I'm also an Eagles fan, and despite our reputation as a completely calm and rational fan base, you'll be surprised to learn that I might be a bit emotional and biased when it comes to this topic. Now, before we get any further into the video, I want to clarify something first. I am a bit too young to remember Donovan McNabb's heyday as a player. But despite that, given who he is and the role he's played in Eagles history, I've heard and seen plenty of things about number 5. I've watched a lot of Donovan highlights and lowlights, and I've done plenty of research into him and his career for this video. My personal opinion on Donovan McNabb, purely as a football player and not on his personality or anything else about him, is as follows. He was decent on the field. a slightly above average level quarterback, but not by much. Certainly, he's no Patrick Mahomes or Drew Brees. I think the word I'm looking for is mid. He's mid. Yeah, that sounds about right. A mid-level quarterback in an era where those mostly didn't exist, which made him appear better than he actually was. Believe it or not, that's actually pretty high praise coming from me. People who know me know that I'm notoriously harsh when it comes to my evaluation of NFL quarterbacks. So for me to call Donovan McNabb mid is actually almost a compliment. In fact, I'm so harsh that I firmly believe that none of the quarterbacks from the 2004 draft class belong in the Hall of Fame. But that's a video for another day, and regardless of my personal thoughts on him, I want to use this video to give Donovan McNabb a fair evaluation. So let's actually get into the positives of his career now. Despite my general apathy towards Donovan McNabb as a whole, I cannot deny that he's the most impactful quarterback in Philadelphia Eagles history. And under his leadership, we'll call it that, leadership, the Eagles saw what is probably the longest sustained run of success in the franchise's history. So he deserves some praise here. McNabb was also the starter for the Eagles for 11 years, so clearly he was doing something right. And making 5 NFC championships over the course of 11 years with a single team is quite the feat. And even if the Eagles only got to the Super Bowl one time out of those 5, it's hard enough to make the Super Bowl as is, let alone win in the playoffs. So, again, Donovan deserves a lot of credit here. I mean, just ask the Dallas Cowboys, who as a franchise have had less playoff wins since McNabb was drafted than McNabb has had NFC championship game appearances. During his tenure, the Eagles went 92-49-1 in the games that Donovan McNabb started in. Winning around 65% of your games as a starter in the NFL, in my view, is pretty good. And Donovan made the Pro Bowl 6 times, including 5 straight years from 2000 to 2004. And although statistically most of Donovan McNabb's numbers aren't exactly eye-popping here, having over 37,000 career passing yards, 234 career passing touchdowns, and a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio over the course of your career is again pretty good. On top of that, Donovan McNabb was also a pretty decent runner, getting nearly 3,500 yards and scoring 29 touchdowns on the ground. Not exemplary by any means, but a team like, the Washington Commanders would absolutely kill for quarterback production like this. And funny enough, Washington did trade for McNabb back in 2010. He then subsequently killed their playoff hopes for that year by going 5-8 as a starter and throwing 15 interceptions to only 14 touchdowns. Heck, heaving out the Eagles' 2nd round and a 4th round pick out of this deal too. Of course, when you talk about the highlights of Donovan McNabb's career, you have to talk about his 2004 campaign, which was by far his best year as a quarterback. Throwing for nearly 3,900 yards and 31 touchdowns to only 8 interceptions to go along with 220 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground, Donovan led the Eagles to a 13-3 record, the #1 seed in the NFC, and a Super Bowl appearance. Donovan's 2004 season was one of the best individual performances by an Eagles player in history, and despite the heartbreaking loss in the Super Bowl to the Patriots, no one can deny that it was not only a special year for the Eagles, but a special one for their quarterback. Of course, at this point, the fact that I mentioned the Super Bowl means that we can't ignore the negatives any longer. And it's these negatives that, in my opinion, make the Donovan era in Philadelphia so controversial, even today. When people talk about the bad things about Donovan McNabb and his time in Philadelphia, they typically aren't talking about what shows up on the stat sheet. And sure, you can point to a 59% career completion percentage, and that's not exactly anything to write home about. But to be fair, quarterbacks in general were less accurate during McNabb's era. And yeah, you can point out that he never had a 4,000-yard season, but again, McNabb was a pretty solid player who won a lot of games, at least when you look at it statistically. I certainly won't deny that. But players in the NFL, and people for that matter in general, are more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. Context absolutely matters, and if you don't take that into account, you're essentially missing half the story. And with this in mind, we get to the bad things about Donovan McNabb's career. chances are, if you ask 100 Eagles fans what they think of Donovan McNabb as a player, I guarantee you half of them will call him a choker. A guy who could not win when the lights got bright. And let's be fair to Donovan McNabb here, he did win a lot of games in his Philadelphia career. 92 wins with the franchise over 11 years is no joke. But when you look at Donovan McNabb's playoff record, a different story starts to be painted here. Donovan only went 9-7 in the playoffs with the Philadelphia Eagles, which is still a winning record. But context, again, matters a lot. 4 of his 7 losses in the playoffs were in the NFC Championship game, and another one was in the Super Bowl. So to say he choked when the lights got brightest isn't exactly a statement with zero credibility. Perhaps the most famous loss Donovan had in the playoffs, more so than the one in the Super Bowl, was the loss in what was to be the final game at the beloved stadium/Greater Philadelphia area jail known as the Vet. And sure, the Philadelphia Eagles lost to the eventual Super Bowl champions in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but it's not like this was a loss you could maybe feel good about, where the team fought all the way to the end and just came up short. For those old enough to remember, they remember the Eagles losing in embarrassing fashion, with the offense scoring only 10 points, including only 3 points in the final 59 minutes of the game. This game is considered so bad by Philadelphians that it's dubbed Black Sunday. Yet, purely from a football standpoint, you could argue that things were worse the next year, when the Eagles managed to score only 3 points in 60 minutes, losing to the Carolina Panthers. Of course, the defense also has its fair share of blame in these games too, but to score only 13 points in 2 NFC Championship games at home as the number 1 seed, it's unacceptable. And fair or not, wins are considered a QB stat, and Donovan McNabb and the Eagles lost 3 NFC Championships in a row from 2001 to 2003, with the offense averaging just over 12 points a game. That is terrible in any era. The Eagles also lost to the Arizona Cardinals in the NFC Championship game in 2008. But to be fair here, the Eagles in 08 should not have been anywhere near the NFC Championship game. And the fact of the matter is, Donovan actually played pretty well in this game. So to say he choked in every single big game is not exactly fair. But over the whole course of his career, a trend does emerge. And with that, let's get into the Super Bowl, because the NFC Championship is not where the playoff woes end for McNabb. The one year the Eagles did make the Super Bowl, which was in 2004, they also lost. And guess what? McNabb threw 3 interceptions in this game. So, again, another point for the people who say he choked in big moments. And despite his terrible performance in the Super Bowl, Donovan actually gets off relatively light, all things considered, though he probably shouldn't. This is because, down 24-14 with a little over 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, it took the Eagles until after the 2-minute warning to score a touchdown. This single drive shifted much of the blame for the loss off of Donovan McNabb and onto head coach Andy Reid, who as a result gained a reputation as a terrible game clock manager until the modern day. But to be fair to Big Red, I'm sure it's hard to manage the game clock when your quarterback, who has performed terribly all game, is supposedly dry heaving and throwing up so frequently in the huddle that wideout Freddie Mitchell had to call plays. You think that might have something to do with the drive taking longer than it should? Because I do. Donovan and Andy Reid denied that this happened in the game, but personally, I tend to believe it actually did. After all, it's not like this would be the only instance of Donovan doing something like this. Just look at this footage from a 2006 game in Tampa Bay, where Donovan got caught on camera throwing up. And while this footage is certainly gross to watch, it highlights another big problem a lot of Eagles fans have had with Donovan McNabb, which is his physical conditioning. Considering Donovan's playing weight in college was 223 pounds, he wasn't exactly known as a small guy. In fact, he was even sponsored by Campbell's Chunky Soup, in no small part due to his size. It was part of his brand and what helped make him the player and personality that he was. But once he got to the NFL, his weight became much more scrutinized, and the issues that potentially stemmed from his playing weight plagued him throughout his career, especially after that 2004 loss in the Super Bowl. And throughout his NFL career, he was listed as weighing 240 pounds, which is significantly larger than his playing weight in college. What's more, he likely weighed more than this, if reports from his final year in the NFL, where he was benched by the Minnesota Vikings, are to be believed. There were reports in the latter half of his career that he had cardiovascular issues, primarily stemming from his weight, which impacted his endurance and ability to stay on the field. In fact, if you look at Donovan's injury history, the major injuries he had mostly occurred in the back half of his career, which lines up with when these reports really began to surface about his health and conditioning problems. To Philadelphia fans, the fact that he likely knew about his health issues and he didn't do anything about it is infuriating. Here was a quarterback being paid millions of dollars with access to top-notch gymnasiums, equipment, dietitians, and athletic trainers, and despite everyone asking him to take care of his health so he could play, he seemingly refused to do so. And as a result, the team didn't perform to expectations in the back half of his career, in large part because Donovan was missing time due to injuries, which likely stemmed from his poor physical condition. As a fan, it's infuriating, and fans in Philadelphia had every right to be upset by this. But ultimately, the conditioning problems with Donovan McNabb pale in comparison to what many cite as his biggest problem as an Eagle, and as a player. The issue I'm about to cover is what really makes him this controversial in Philadelphia, even to this day. The conditioning is really just one of the more notable examples of this bigger issue showing up. The reason why Donovan McNabb is so hated in Philadelphia by so many people is because of his attitude and the complete and utter lack of accountability he had both on and off the field, both to his teammates and to the city of brotherly love. And this is where things start to really get ugly. Now, unless you've lived under a rock, chances are you've heard of the feud between T.O. and Donovan McNabb. In fact, it's still going on today. But McNabb's feud with Terrell Owens is not the only instance in which he's gotten into fights with his teammates. He once upset his teammates after a tie in 2008 because he didn't play with urgency. Famously, McNabb said afterwards that he didn't know that ties were a thing in the NFL. Deshaun Jackson has gone on record calling the quarterback selfish after Donovan McNabb played team youth in a playoff loss. Linebacker-turned-media personality Jeremiah Trotter has criticized the quarterback extensively, particularly for his performances in big games. Rumors began to circulate that when McNabb was in Washington, he refused to practice with tempo, despite the pleas of his coaches and teammates to do so. There are even rumors that he would drink heavily before games, including before that 2004 Super Bowl, which, again, he probably and most definitely did throw up in. Now, I'm not going to specifically comment on whether or not I think the criticism from his teammates is warranted or whether or not I think these rumors about Donovan McNabb are true, but I will say that when you look at these rumors and these comments as a collective whole, there's definitely a narrative that begins to emerge. And this narrative portrays Donovan McNabb as a selfish person and teammate with accountability issues. Now, with all that being said, I want to explain something about Philadelphia fans here that I think will ultimately explain why Donovan McNabb is still such a polarizing figure to this day. And really, at their core, Philadelphia fans are actually quite simple creatures. They want someone who's willing to put in hard work and try to improve year in, year out. And sure, they love to win and they hate to lose. I mean, who doesn't? And yeah, sometimes you'll get booed when you lose in a big game, playing in embarrassing fashion. I'll admit it, I've booed the teams that I root for before. They'll curse and they'll yell and they'll lash out in anger. But at the end of the day, they do it, believe it or not, out of love. It's their way to tell the players, we expect better from you. We know you can be better, and that's what we expect as your fans. Because at the end of the day, and really this is the same for every single fan base, fans aren't just fans of the teams that they root for. They're also fans of the players that play on that team. And ultimately, it's how these players handle those moments of failure and adversity that matter the most to fans. Players who step up as leaders like Jalen Hurts and Bryce Harper and who take accountability for themselves and their teammates are beloved regardless of success level. I mean, when the Eagles picked Jalen Hurts in 2020, many fans weren't exactly thrilled. Yet here we are 3 years later and many are calling him the best quarterback in franchise history over the guy I'm currently talking about. That's in no small part because he's really good at football, but also because he says and does all of the right things off the field. He even shouldered the blame in the Super Bowl loss this year that was entirely due to the defense doing literally absolutely nothing all night long, running the same ineffective soft zone scheme that Jonathan Gannon ran all year. The same scheme that gets torn to shreds the moment a somewhat competent quarterback plays against it. They ran that defense against Patrick Mahomes because Jonathan Gannon was taking illegal job interviews with the Arizona Cardinals and was too lazy to change anything about it. I cannot believe it. I cannot believe you, Gannon. You lost us the Super Bowl, and then you have the audacity to... Anyways, the reason why supremely talented guys like Ben Simmons and Donovan McNabb are run out of Philadelphia is because they refuse to improve themselves and they have no accountability. Carson Wentz's career ended similarly. The attitude ultimately is what makes Donovan McNabb such a villain to so many fans. Fair or not, whenever McNabb faced adversity in his career, whenever the Eagles suffered one of those big losses, he didn't take accountability. He didn't step up as a leader. He didn't improve. Instead, he tended to throw others under the bus in quite the selfish manner. And despite all of the records that Donovan has, and all of the success the Eagles had with him at quarterback, this one very ugly, very glaring flaw of Donovan McNabb's meant that he would never truly be accepted by Eagles fans no matter what he did. And that's true even to this day. And ultimately, it's these good, bad, and ugly things about Donovan McNabb and his career that I talked about in this video that really end up making him Philadelphia's polarizing player. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to crack open a nice, cold drink, kick my feet up, and watch Jalen Hurts crush 600-pound squats. At this point, I think I've earned it. And as always, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
I stand here to let you know I truly love and respect everything that you've given me for 10 years. I stand here and up from the bottom of my heart to let you know I truly appreciate everything you've done for me. Words did not say how much I truly love you. Those 10 banners up there, 6 of them we are responsible for. And I want you to understand that. So if you don't feel this energy that's going down right now, number 5 will always love you. The city of brotherly love. Thank you.